Good afternoon, everyone. One of the highlights of all of our FDP meetings going back to the year one has been the federal agency update session. And that is where the federal agencies that are active participants in the FDP let us know the latest news about things that are happening at the agency, things that we as researchers and research administrators need to know and understand to better do our jobs. And so normally the federal agency update session is hosted by Debbie Raffi of the Office of Naval Research. Unfortunately, she couldn't be with us today, and I'm pleased to introduce Wade Wargo, also from the Office of Naval Research. Wade is the director of the University Business Affairs Office at ONR. He is also co-chair of the FDP's Research Administration Committee and is a member of the FDP Executive Committee. We're very happy to see you, Wade, and I'm pleased to turn it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Dick. Appreciate the introduction. And Debbie Raffi was sorry she couldn't join us today. We'll have today 5 federal agencies giving updates, and then we'll also have the Greer program as well through the national academies. So to start things off, we're very happy to have Jean Feldman, who's the head of the policy office at NSF in their Division of Institution Award Support Office. So take it away, Jean.
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be here at the FDP meeting in September of 2020. And let me kick it off. Next slide, please. Next slide again. Okay, so what am I going to cover today? Well, there's a lot of activity that's been going on, and what I've put together for you today in the next half hour is I'm going to cover some very important topics that kind of are a comprehensive set of bullets that cover what we've really learned over the last several months about our proposal and award policies and procedures guide implementation, our disclosure policies, as well as a couple of new topics that we want to present to you today. One on the Research Performance Progress Report and on Research.gov sign-in changes. So next slide, please. So PAP Guide 20-1. You all know that there's been a long history with this PAP Guide implementation. I've talked to this slide many, many times. The PAP Guide did go into effect June 1st, 2020. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing stress on proposers, the research community communicated with NSF in the spring that they really had not adequately had an opportunity to prepare and train their staff for implementation of some of the new requirements in the PAP Guide, particularly with respect to the requirement that you use an NSF-approved format to submit your biographical sketch and current and pending support information to NSF. And so what NSF decided to do was to delay implementation of that particular requirement until October 5th, 2020. So again, the timing here is perfect to ensure that you have the latest and greatest information that you need to comply with the requirement. All of the other PAP Guide requirements did go into effect on June 1st, including a new requirement to submit government-wide reps and certs via the System for Award Management, the new requirement to provide email documentation of program officer approval for the submission of rapid and eager proposals, and clarifications to current and pending support coverage, as well as other changes throughout the document. Next slide, please. So I'd like to focus a bit on some of what these major things we've learned in this area are. So let's regroup. What do we use the biographical sketch for? We use the bio sketch to assess the capability of the individual or team to carry out the research as proposed. And we've always required that you identify, or that all the senior personnel in their bio sketch identify all appointments. But clearly, folks were a little confused about what that meant exactly, and what appointments were in and what appointments were not in. And so what we did was we clarified that language to specify that the appointments section must include any titled academic, professional, or institutional appointments, whether or not payment is received. One of the areas, however, that we've received a lot of inquiries on is specifically about the professional appointments. And so since that time, we have clarified that what we want as what in terms of professional appointments are that senior personnel must identify all current domestic or foreign professional appointments outside of the individual's academic, professional, or institutional appointments at the proposing organization. And we believe that that clarity is going to be very important in terms of faculty meeting that particular requirement. So we hope, and that clarification is out on the NSF website for your use. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to go over a number of the important clarifications that we have made in the area of current and pending support. When we first started this exercise, there were only a couple of bullets in the terms of what clarifications. Obviously, that set of clarifications has expanded as we've learned more. Again, to take a step back, NSF uses the information to assess the capability or capacity of the individual to carry out the research as proposed, as well as to assess any potential overlap or duplication. So what we found in the way of working with the community is that there was confusion over what we meant by you must provide all current and pending support. So we've supplemented that language in the PAP guide with additional coverage that we believe will hopefully clarify NSF's expectations. So information must be provided for all current and pending support, irrespective of whether such support is provided through the proposing organization or directly to the individual. One of the other biggest lessons we've learned in terms of communicated with the community is that project or in-kind contributions without a time commitment are not required to be reported as part of current and pending support. Why? Well, let's go back to that first bullet. If we really want to understand the capacity of the individual to carry it out, obviously, if there are no real time commitments, then that does not need to be provided as part of the current and pending support information. The PAP guide obviously has the complete coverage, but I'm going to go over more of the clarifications in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. In-kind contributions that are intended for use on the project are included as part of facilities, equipment, and other resources. Those came in loudly and clearly when we put the document out for public comment. In the Federal Register, folks said, look, if it's for this project, then reviewers need to see all of the resources that are available to that project in order to assess whether whether there are sufficient facilities, equipment, and resources to carry out the project as proposed. So thank you very much to the community, because we really believe that strengthened that aspect of the proposal. Probably the most fundamental comment to take away is the second bullet on this slide. And based on the comments and questions that we keep getting into policy at nsf.gov, we clearly have more work to do on this. Information contained in current and pending support is separate and distinct from the information provided in the budget. So I'm going to provide a little more information on that. So person month information included in current and pending support obviously may differ from what you put in the way of how much funding you are requesting from NSF on a given project. The information contained on the budget is separate and distinct from the information entered on current and pending support regarding how much time the individual is or has committed to spend on a project. For example, if an individual is not requesting salary for a project, there would be no person month shown on the budget. They would, however, be expending effort on the project, and a number greater than 0 would be entered in current and pending support. If the individual is not requesting salary and will not be expending any effort, they shouldn't be reported in current and pending support. So there's a lot of confusion. I want 0 money from NSF, but when you really drill down and ask them, they're like, no, it's 0. But you're going, aren't you spending time on this? Well, no, I'm not asking for, aren't you spending time on this? That is what we want entered on current and pending support. In-kind contributions that are not, again, intended for use on the project and have no associated time commitment should not be reported in current and pending support. Next slide, please. Now, we've also had a lot of questions about mentoring that a faculty give to their students each and every day. So mentoring activities that are part of an individual's regular appointment to the proposing organization, you don't have to report those. If an individual, however, received in-kind support either directly or through their organization from an external organization to support mentoring of undergrad or grad students, that in-kind support, including the time associated with such mentoring, should be identified in the individual's current and pending support submission. Then we talk about a bit about everything in the current and pending support. It's really centered around the research endeavors of a particular individual. And we even use the language, current and pending support includes, all of this kind of information that is really supportive of that particular individual's research endeavors. And so that is language that you may see again in the future, and it's tied to the individual. So if, for example, a faculty member has a person working in their lab, and they are definitely working with that individual, but that individual themselves has support from someone else to work on that project, the faculty member that is doing the mentoring does not include that on their current and pending support. The individual actually receiving the funding would put it on their current and pending support to NSF. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, it did move. I didn't see that. Okay, so now we have language that I'd like to talk about that is very new. We have added a new term and condition on post-award disclosure of current and pending support information and in-kind contributions. This particular term and condition goes into effect on October 5th. That's a big day at NSF, obviously, for new awards and funding amendments on existing awards. And what we have found is that based on all of these clarifications, institutions have found out that they too have learned a lot about this. And they have found situations where a particular faculty member may not have disclosed current current support or in-kind contribution that should have been provided as part of the proposal, and after an award is made, the organization finds out about it. They're contacting NSF and they're going, what do we do? Well, what we wanted to do was make sure everyone understood exactly what the expectations were. So we put out a term and condition that identified the process that you will use. It lets you know precisely what information you have to provide, that you provide it electronically via the other request category in the notification request module in Research.gov, and NSF will then communicate with you after that is being submitted regarding what you've submitted to the foundation. And in many cases, it may mean absolutely nothing, that it was fine. We at NSF look at what they failed to submit and we say, okay, we get it, but that would ultimately not impact an individual's ability to carry out the research as proposed. And then we would let you know that, and things would move on as they have. Next slide, please. We've also added for our international collaborations on major facilities, a new term and condition as well. Actually, this is a revision of an existing term and condition that addressed international collaborations. But what this identifies is that the awardee must notify NSF of any potential collaborations with non-US organizations or governments in advance prior to entering into formal relationships, as well as a listing of all existing foreign collaborations with non-US organizations. This particular term and condition, again, only applies to our major multi-user research facility projects, as well as our FFRDCs. Again, it goes into effect on October 5th, 2020. Next slide, please. We have made some edits or revisions to NSF's project reporting format for annual and final project reports that is still in this research protection space. And many of you have seen these kinds of questions asked on other agencies' project reporting formats. And the reason is because it's actually part of the research performance progress report. And NSF is now implementing a new version of the research performance project report that many agencies have implemented some time ago that will be used in submission of annual and final project reports in Research.gov. You see this effective date of October 5th. NSF will implement the revised RPPR format, which aims, we believe, ultimately to reduce administrative burden for researchers. Next slide, please. What this particular slide does is to summarize for you what are the kind of changes that faculty can expect to see when they go to complete a new project report that is due on or after October 5th, 2020. Well, the first and most significant change that I'd like to address is that PIs and co-PIs will need to notify NSF when active other support has changed since the award was made or since submission of the most recent annual report. And you will be using, just like you used to submit your current and pending support at the time of proposal submission, you will also use an NSF approved format to submit current and pending support updates as part of your NSF annual and final report. And so we believe that this will put the parameters around it. Again, it is not all senior personnel. NSF has opted to apply this to PIs and co-PIs only. And again, this will only be new active other support. It's not to address pending, and it's not to address planned. It is to tell us about that other support that you have received since you either the award was made or you've submitted your last annual project report. We're also asking some new additional questions around the percentage of the awards budget that was spent in a foreign country. If there's a change in the primary performance site location from that originally proposed, and details about the impact on teaching and educational experiences. These are not NSF alone questions. Again, these are all questions that are currently part of the Research Performance Progress Report, and NSF is now implementing them. All of the RPPR instructions have been harmonized with the federal-wide standard that have been approved by the National Science and Technology Council. We've also focused heavily when we did this, and part of the reason you're, well, why did it take NSF so long? Because we did a holistic approach to say, instead of, okay, let's just add all the new stuff that's in the new RPPR. We wanted to take a look at what we've implemented to see if it was even stuff that we still needed or required. And that's where we focused and spent a lot of time and energy with an internal NSF agency committee to take a look at that. So where possible, we've also consolidated some of the boxes, combined some of the boxes, removed some of the boxes to helpfully streamline and reduce that administrative burden for faculty. Next slide, please. Adding current and pending support to a project summary. This is showing you some screens on how this would look. You see that there will be a new, as part of the participants section, there will be a question, has there been a change in the active support since the last reporting period? If you check yes, you'll be required to upload your most the most recent current and pending support document. Again, that will be either your NSF fillable format or Science CV, and then uploaded to that particular section of the report. So hopefully this will identify for you that it's not a difficult process. But you also see at the bottom, you're also identifying collaborating country collaborators. That's always been there, but we wanted to give you a sense in this screen of where that information would appear when you go to enter it in your project report. Next slide, please. We also add the help test states for NSF specific purposes in the year one annual report. Has there been a change in current other support since the award was made? And for subsequent annual reports, has there been a change in current other support since the last reporting period? Just so you could see how that would appear on the screen in front of you. Next slide, please. Again, we've also talked about the changes that were made there, and I think that we've already seen, and this was already been summarized in a prior slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so we also have some Research.gov sign-in and password recovery with primary email address. And so these are some slides that have been put together for you effective the 28th of September. The Research.gov sign-in page will include 3 sign-in options. Primary email address plus password, that is a new option. NSF ID plus password, that already exists. And an organization issued in common ID. That's also an existing option. Also effective September 28th, users will be able to enter either their primary email address or their NSF ID for NSF account password recovery. Next slide. We also have a couple other sessions where we will be going into this in more detail, some of these issue areas. We have a Science CB presentation Tuesday at 1 o'clock, as well as a Research.gov session to hear more about proposal submission modernization with an actual demonstration to show you more about what PSM looks like and how it's been enhanced over the last several months. Next slide, please. We also have virtual grants conferences. Obviously, we would love to hold these in person, but we cannot do that in the fall, obviously, given the current environment. So we will be holding a virtual NSF grants conferences during the weeks of November 16th and 30th. The sessions will be recorded and available on demand. And unlike the regular in-person conferences where obviously we have to charge, registration will be free of charge and open on Thursday, October 29th. And with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Thanks a lot, Jean. So far, we have 4 questions for you.
Okay.
The first one is, will there be an opportunity for PIs to include a COVID impact statement in their application? That is, how COVID has affected their research?
No, at the present time, we have made no changes to how you would do that in your proposal as it relates to COVID-19. Obviously, we're continuing to explore the necessity for that. And so stay tuned. If we do put something out there, we will make sure that that information is widely disseminated and that we provide more clarity on how such information would be provided if the foundation would decide to do so. But we've made no public statement at the present time about that issue.
Okay, thanks. The next question, what would be an example of something a PI would be involved in that would have no time listed but beyond a current and pending?
Well, first of all, no time, just so you know, there isn't the possibility to do that right now, meaning no time, because literally that is a text box that is checked on both the fillable format and on Science CV. So if there's 0, it won't let you enter that. You must enter a value. But let me give you, because you asked the question and it's a very good one, we have found that in a number of the in-kind contribution areas, there may not be a lot of time available. Someone gives you a data set, for example, and that's one of the questions that was specifically raised to us. I got it, no time commitment. Do I have to report it? Again, if it's going to be used on this project, you put it in facilities, equipment, and other resources. That might be extremely valuable to a reviewer to know that you have access to that. But if it's not for use on this project and there is no time commitment, you do not report it.
Okay, thank you. The next one, must changes in support that are no longer applicable because the grant ended also be reported in project reports and prior to award? I guess that means it's no longer current if it ended. Do you still have to report it?
Yeah, no, I mean, you're doing current support as part of that. So we have a lot of faculty who could go on for pages and pages of the support on projects that have come to closure. You're providing current support.
Okay. Next, are investigators required to list in current and pending visiting scholars in their lab that are supported by an international scholarship program that pay the visiting scholar directly?
If they are providing support directly to the individual, and that salary support, and the support is not going directly to that individual, no, the answer is no. They would not be providing that as part of current and pending support.
Okay, next question. Will NSF require organizations to verify the current and pending information submitted in a report by PIs, co-PIs, since they submit these on their own?
The answer is no. Those are submitted by the faculty member. And they're actually, so some faculty all realize this is very important information you're providing. And at the end of every report, you literally sign a statement that pretty much like an individual does, an AOR does when they're submitting a proposal, that this information is true and accurate to the best of your knowledge and belief. And that is what we rely on. And that is just, if you want to take that out a step further, that's what our IG is relying on as well.
Okay, next, if an annual report is not due, just to clarify, does the PI have to file an RPPR if other support has changed since the last report?
No, you submit it at the time you're submitting your next annual report. So you don't have to just pick out a report and everybody submit them effective October 5th. You would do that in the cycle in which your annual project report is due to be submitted.
Okay, if a greater amount of effort is listed on the current and pending compared to the budget, is that considered cost sharing?
It is absolutely not. There is no relationship between what you do on the report and what you put. That was what that second bullet means. You may be providing 0 time, or obviously you're not on the budget, so you're not providing any time. You're identifying it in facilities, equipment, and other resources. To be voluntary committed cost sharing, what's the requirements? It must be on the budget. That's in accordance with 2 CFR 200. So to be voluntary committed cost sharing, it must be on the budget, period.
Okay, next, does the NSF require a disclosure of foreign talent program participation of any key study personnel?
I'm key study personnel. Key
Here,
study
I'll read
person.
it again.
Yeah.
Does the NSF require a you're not sure?
Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want me to read it again?
Yes, please.
Okay. Oh wait, it just evaporated here. 1 second. Does
No
the
problem.
NSF require a disclosure of foreign talent program participation of any key study personnel?
We require individuals that are senior personnel to provide disclosure documents. That's a part that, so that's key PI, that's PIs, co-PIs, faculty. Any individual must submit collaborator and other affiliations, okay, BioSketch, and current and pending support. So if you're an individual that meets that criteria, you would identify that you're part of a talent program to the National Science Foundation. But it's limited to senior project personnel that must provide the disclosure information.
Okay.
And some of these, I'm just saying.
I think this is the last one.
Yeah, I'm not, if that didn't answer the individual's question, jfeldman@nsf.gov, and I will iterate with you to make sure that we've identified that we have answered all your question.
Okay, thank you, Jane. And I think this is the last one for you. If reports are past due come October 5th, will they be done in the new format? I guess, in other words, if a report was due earlier than October 5th, are they done in the new format? Or
Yeah, well, unfortunately, what's going to happen is there's only one format. So once you pull it up and go back in, you're going to find that's the format in progress. But if it's due, you didn't submit it, once October 5th comes, you're going to have to provide that information.
Okay, why don't we move on? If folks who had further questions, if you could just submit them, we could answer them later.
Absolutely.
But thank you very much, Jean.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
your time, and that was very informative.
Thank you.
So moving on to the next speaker, we'll have from NIH, we have Kristen Ta, who is in the Division of Grants Policy at the Office of Policy for Extramural Research Administration. Go ahead, Kristen.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to walk through a few slides today with some policy updates, and then we should have time for some questions or some discussion if you guys have other areas you want me to cover in a little more detail. Next slide. Okay, next slide. We're going to go ahead and start with just a very brief update on COVID-19. As you know, things in this space are kind of always shifting and changing, so I'd encourage everyone to go check out our Office of Extramural Research website on COVID-19. You can find all of our policy guidance, funding opportunity announcements, FAQs, any kind of information you need related to COVID-19 is located there. Next slide. So as we discussed at the last FDP meeting earlier this year, OMB issued several memos that provided flexibilities to our recipients, both conducting COVID-19 research and those who were affected by COVID-19. Now that we're a little bit later in the year, most of those flexibilities have ended or are ending. And so I just wanted to remind everyone that any flexibilities going forward will need to be submitted and will be reviewed by the funding institute or center on a case-by-case basis. So at this point, most of those broad flexibilities have ended, but obviously NIH is still willing to work with our recipients where we can to approve things case by case. So just reach out to your IC if you have questions or any issues that you need assistance with. Next slide. And so along with the flexibilities, NIH has also received a lot of money through emergency appropriations for COVID-19 research. We've gotten funding through 3 of the supplemental appropriations that have passed to date. We think there may be more coming if anything passes in the future. And so we're currently working hard to fund awards through competitive supplements, administrative supplements, and new grant awards. And in addition to posting these in our NIH Guide to Grants and Contracts, as we do with all of our announcements, I wanted to point you to, again, our OER website. We have a link there that lists all of the COVID-19 specific funding opportunity announcements. We get a lot of questions from small businesses and folks who are really interested in that COVID-19 funding. So you can find all of that information in one central location there. Next slide. Okay, and the last topic I have for COVID-19 is related to documentation. So obviously this is a very high profile issue. We've gotten a lot of money and there have been a lot of flexibilities granted related to COVID-19. So we do anticipate a significant number of audits from the OIG and GAO in this area. And so I just wanted to emphasize for our recipients that the key piece to keep in mind really is documentation. So making sure that you maintain appropriate records and cost documentation to substantiate all of the charges that you may have made specific to COVID-19. So such as canceled travel or salaries that are charged to an award when folks can't do the work on that award, all of those kind of unusual costs. It's really important to maintain adequate documentation for those because, as with all costs, these are subject to the audit requirements under 2 CFR. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to roll through a couple of policy updates. Next slide. This first one is related to our recent efforts over the past few years to really emphasize NIH's expectations for recipients to provide a safe and healthy working environment for all of their employees. This was a guide notice that we issued earlier this summer, and the key piece is that when a recipient institution is requesting a change in PDPI or other senior key personnel, or when you're relinquishing an award to transfer to a new institution or submitting a Type 7 transfer application, NIH expects that prior approval request or application to include mention if that change is related to concerns about safety or a healthy work environment. So this might include harassment, bullying, retaliation, any issues involving hostile working conditions. And the reason that we're requesting this information is really so that NIH can make sound funding decisions when we're approving those change in PIs or when we're approving a grant to transfer from one institution to the next. We really want to make sure that information is shared appropriately with us so that we can be sure that moving to a new institution or to a new investigator, that there is going to be a safe working environment and that any concerns related to harassment, bullying, any of those types of issues have been addressed adequately so that everyone can do high quality research. Next slide. So this next update is related to administrative supplement applications. So I'm sure everyone's very familiar with e-submission for most of our NIH grant applications. And one area that's taken a little bit longer to implement is electronic submission of administrative supplement applications. But this is really important to us at NIH because when we get an electronic application, we get a ton of structured data that goes into our systems and helps us with reporting and tracking. And when we're getting administrative supplement applications that come in just as PDFs, you know, the paper applications, we don't get that structured data, and it's a lot more challenging for our institutes and centers as they're funding those supplements and managing them. So beginning earlier this summer, NIH requires recipients to submit all administrative supplement applications electronically, and this applies to both single and multi-project awards. And so this applies to all of our NIH admin sub-funding opportunity announcements. And along with this change, the old ERA Commons streamlined submission method for administrative supplements has changed a little bit. So you can go to the guide notice to see the details on how you can now use ERA Commons to submit those admin sub applications through Assist. Next slide. All right, next slide. So we just heard a lot from Jean about other support, current and pending support. I'm going to touch a little bit on this today, but not in too much detail because this is something that we're still working to finalize at NIH. And so, as you might remember, last year we made a few updates to the NIH grants policy statement related to other support. And since then, we've really been working to update our forms and instructions to align with not only those updates, but also the recently issued J-Corps guidance documents, as well as some changes that our colleagues at NSF and other agencies are making. And so the outcomes of that work we've done over the past year is, in the coming month or two, we'll be clarifying our existing policies on other support and the bio sketch to add some additional details on in-kind contributions and gifts, as well as outlining more clearly the purpose of the bio sketch and what it's used for. We're also updating our application instructions and forms for bio sketch and other support, and we'll be updating the data format and collections to look a little bit more like the NSF forms and reduce some burden by making things a bit more similar across the board. Next slide. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the bio sketch changes. So we're making some updates to align with the language in the J-Corps report and to minimize the duplication of other support. So looking forward, we'll be updating the title of Section B, which is currently Positions and Honors. We'll be adding scientific appointments to that section and clarifying that we are requesting information on all scientific appointments, domestic or foreign, whether they're receiving monetary compensation or not. And then we'll also be removing the details that are currently required in Section D, research support. When we did our analysis, we realized that this section really almost completely duplicates the other support information that's submitted at just in time. And we realized that it really wasn't necessary in that initial bio sketch. Next slide. And so along with the changes to the bio sketch, we're also going to be doing a complete overhaul of our other support format page. Currently, it's just that Word document template that's used to fill in the information, and that doesn't really allow us to collect structured data, and the current format also doesn't allow recipients to provide details on in-kind contributions. So we've developed a new format page, which looks very similar to what you've seen from NSF, and we've also developed a detailed instructions document that goes with that and walks you through all of the different areas that we are collecting information. Okay, next slide. And so now I'm just going to walk through, I think I only have one systems process update. Next slide. So this was a guide notice that we issued earlier this summer. I'm sure you all remember that previously the NIH summary statement was available only to PIs in ERA Commons. And so we updated that this summer so that authorized organizational representatives who have the signing official role in ERA Commons are able to see the summary statement as well. And this doesn't change the access that the principal investigators have. They'll continue to receive those notifications of the availability of the summary statement. It's just that the AOR will be able to review that as well in the ERA, in the status screen. Next slide. Okay, so now I'm going to talk through a couple of HHS initiatives and Fed-wide system updates that we have coming up this fall. Next slide. So the first is an HHS Reinvent Grants Management Initiative that we've been working on for the past couple of years. And this relates to the SF425 FFR. So the first phase of this effort will be coming in January 1st, 2021. Recipients will begin submitting their SF425 FFR reports directly in the payment management system as opposed to the ERA Commons system where they're currently submitted now. And so this is not a change in the policies related to the FFR. The due dates remain the same. It's simply HHS implementing their efforts to have this report coming in one single source across all of the operating divisions. And so we issued a guide notice about this a little bit earlier this summer, and we're going to be continuing to provide more information and training for all of our recipients so that everyone's ready to go when this change goes into effect in January. Next slide. Okay, and so submitting the FFR in PMS is phase 1, and soon we're going to also be coming with phase 2 of this FFR initiative, which is the one we're really excited about, and that is the elimination of the quarterly cash transaction report in PMS. So beginning in FY21, we're still waiting on the final dates and details, so we'll be issuing a guide notice to announce that as soon as it is finalized, but it should be coming up sometime in the next 6 months. Instead of submitting those quarterly reports, recipients will instead certify when they draw down the funds that they'll be used timely and in accordance with the cost principles and terms and conditions. So this is a change we're really looking forward to. It should help immensely with reconciling information in the payment management system and with timely closeout. So we're very excited about it. Next slide. And then the last initiative I'm going to provide an update on today is the Notice of Award, page 1. This is another HHS Reinvent Grants Management initiative, and this effort is to provide a standardized first page of the Notice of Award across all of the HHS operating divisions. So whether you get a grant from CDC or HRSA or NIH, that first page and the data elements that are on it are going to be the same. This is scheduled for implementation beginning very, very soon on October 1st, 2020. And you can see in the guide notice that we issued all of the data elements that will be captured in that page 1. And we'll also be posting soon exactly what it's going to look like as that rolls out. And so one thing I just wanted to emphasize with this is while the page 1 will be standardized, there are of course many NIH specific terms as well as grant specific terms that are included in that Notice of Award. And those will continue to be provided in sections 3 and 4 of the Notice of Award. Next slide. All right, and lastly, I just wanted to plug, similar to NSF, NIH is not doing our in-person seminar this fall, but we are very excited to be doing our virtual seminar on grants administration at the end of October. I highly recommend everybody sign up and join. There are no registration fees, and we'll be doing a detailed session on our other support and BioSketch updates, as well as a detailed session on the implementation of the 2 CFR updates. So we're currently working through those to analyze exactly how that's going to impact our NIH policies, and we'll be providing some more detailed information on that in our October session. And with that, I will open it up for questions.
All right, thanks, Kristen. There's quite a few questions here and some overlap. I'll do my best here. The first one relates to somebody's asking about the effective date of the PPE policy 20-164. Would pending proposals that include PPE be subject to this policy, and generally just how retroactive is it, if at all?
Sure. That's actually a great question, and I probably need to add that guide notice to my slide deck for the NIH updates. So the effective date of that notice, I believe, was the date that it was published. But we are currently working on developing some FAQs and some additional guidance that will go with that notice. So I'll make sure that we confirm that and we can include that as one of the FAQs, as well as whether it's going to be applicable to existing awards or retroactive. I think it's just going to be going forward, but I want to confirm that, and we'll make sure to cover that in our FAQs.
Okay, thanks, Kristen. Next question, any chance NIH will start referring to current and pending support rather than using the term other support?
So that's not a change that we have planned in the works right now. It's still going to be called other support on our end.
Okay. Will supplemental funding all have unique CFDA numbers or award numbers?
So no, we did not set up unique CFDA numbers for our supplemental funding. The only way that they're really going to look different from a regular award is that we do have to set them up in separate PMS accounts. So the doc numbers in PMS will have suffixes that indicate which supplemental appropriation that it is from. If you're interested in seeing details on the grants that we're awarding specific to COVID, we do have flags in our system. So you can see that in NIH Reporter, exactly what awards are related to COVID-19 and that are tied to that supplemental funding.
Okay. Next, I don't recall the context of this, but I'm hoping you will. Is the relinquishing institution responsible for the statement about the PI departing from their institution?
Okay, yes. So that was related to the notice about safety in the workplace. So yes, the relinquishing institution, if the reason that that PI is leaving and relinquishing the award, if that's related to concerns about safety in the workplace, the relinquishing institution would be responsible for including that statement when they submit that to the IC.
Okay. If there has been a complaint regarding a key person in the past, but the move or change of effort is not related to the complaint, should the unrelated past complaint be disclosed to NIH?
If it's a past complaint that's been resolved and it's no longer an issue, like there's no longer any kind of monitoring plan or concern about that, that wouldn't need to be disclosed. But if it is in any way related, we would at least expect to be notified about it so that we can be sure that it's not impacting the change in some way.
Okay, the next one, I think there's quite a few that overlap with this, but this one asks, can you please address why the NIH did not adopt the Science CV template to be used by NSF when the original plan was that both NIH and NSF would move this new format to ensure standardization?
Sure. So actually our long-term plan is to use a Science CV template for our other support submissions. It's really just a matter of timing. We've been working for a while to get this out. And so our first phase of issuing the updated forms and instructions is going to be a fillable form, but we are working actively with Science CV to get that up and running as quickly as we can.
Okay, we are still seeing institutes allowing submission of supplements using PDF attachments. What, if anything, is OD doing to ensure that current requirements are being followed?
We are working with the ICs to communicate that requirement, and you should be seeing less and less of that. There were a couple out there right as we were making the switch where there wasn't really time to adjust, but we are working on that going forward, and everything should be coming in electronically.
What is the timeline for NIH to publish updates to the other support document templates? Should we expect NIH to adopt Science CV format moving forward, which you mentioned in the last part, I think?
Right, so we are planning to issue the updated guidance and forms and instructions probably toward the end of October or early November. And then we would want to give folks time to kind of update their systems, familiarize themselves with that information, and the new forms would be required likely sometime in January.
Okay, is there I think you just said that. Will the score and summary statements be available through the system-to-system APIs?
So I am not in our systems policy branch, so I do not know that off the top of my head. But I can look into that, and if I'm sure these questions will be emailed to me, so I can make sure that we address that. I just need to go back and check.
Okay, I'm moving down. I think I'm skipping a few here. The NIH presentation referred to recent J-Corps guidance multiple times. The community has been eagerly awaiting this guidance for months now, but I'm not aware that it has actually been issued yet. Can you say more about this?
So it was issued in June. The OSTP director delivered a presentation, and I believe the slide deck is posted online, and there may actually be a link in my slides. I know there is in a couple of versions, but I can provide that link after the presentation for sure.
Okay, not sure if this is duplicate, but I'll ask for the new standard page 1, have you plan to enable grantees to receive the standard award data as a data set as opposed to providing award as PDF only?
That's another kind of systems question that I'm not super familiar with, but I can look into that. I think right now it's likely only going to be a PDF. I don't know if down the road if there will be plans to provide it as a data set. I know that's likely the goal, but.
Okay. If a transfer of PI does not involve an unsafe work environment, are we supposed to indicate that it doesn't apply or only include info when the transfer does involve an unsafe work environment?
Sure. So if it does not involve any concerns about a safe work environment, you don't need to say anything. It only needs to be mentioned when there is an issue.
Okay, there is confusion related to the inclusion of FCOI in the Protecting U.S. Biomedical Intellectual Innovation Grid. Why is this a column like other support as opposed to just a note included in a paragraph?
Sure. So we understand that there was some confusion by including FCOI in that table along with other support and BioSketch and those types of areas. We are working to clarify that a little bit, but we've tried to put in there, the FCOI requirements are separate from other support. They're separate from the BioSketch. The table wasn't intended to blend the two, so we are working on clarifying that.
Okay, I'll do the last question here since it's now 2:30. Is the transition for phase 2 change effective FY 2021 or FY 2022?
So the change for FFR submission in the PMS is going to be happening in January 2021. So that will be FY 21. We also do expect the discontinuation of the FCTR in FY 21 as well. We just don't have the exact date yet, but it should be coming this coming fiscal year.
All right, well, we'll stop there so we can move on. Thank you very much, Kristen. A lot of questions. Well done. We'll move on to NASA is up next for agency updates, and we'll have Mary Sladek, who's a program manager in the NASA's Science Mission Directorate, and Kenitra Cobbs, who's a program analyst or senior program analyst in their grants policy and compliance branch. If I got any of that wrong, ladies, let me know, but take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Kenitra Cobbs, and you're correct. I am a senior program analyst with the Grants Policy and Compliance Branch within NASA's Office of the Chief Financial Officer. Speaking with me today is Mary Sladek, a NASA program manager with NASA's Science Mission Directorate. And in this agency updates for NASA, we will discuss NASA awards at a glance and updates for the Grants Policy and Compliance Branch, EPSCoR, HEO, and SMD. Slide, please. Okay, so NASA awards at a glance. In the fiscal year of 2019, NASA issued $1.1 billion in grants and cooperative agreement. That is the standard representation of the amount of funding NASA issues in awards each fiscal year. Each year, NASA issues about 1,600 new awards, and at any given time, NASA is managing about 6,000 active awards. The majority of NASA award recipients are institutions of higher education, and that's both private and public institutions and nonprofit organizations. Those are our largest recipients. After that, I believe it's for-profit organizations. The vast majority of NASA awards are issued to support research activities. Next slide, please. Okay, NASA grants and policy compliance. First, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so this slide represents a few of the grant policy and compliance fiscal year 2021 primary focuses. One area of focus is updating NASA's guidance, so it's to be updated accordingly, as well as NASA's adoption of the 2 CFR 200, which is 2 CFR 1800. In addition, we will update our guidebook for proposers responding to a NASA notice of funding opportunity, which that will be updated annually. And that will be considering the 2 CFR 200 revisions and update our NASA's guidance for preparation and submission of unsolicited proposals. Another focus is that NASA, we are rescinding the regulation 14 CFR 1274, cooperative agreements with commercial firms requiring mandatory cost sharing, as 2 CFR 200 and 2 CFR 1800 more than adequately covers these particular awards. Therefore, 14 CFR 1274 is no longer needed. Next slide, please. And this is updates for NASA's EPSCoR, and that stands for Established Program to Stimulate Competitive Research. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so EPSCoR, it established partnerships with government, higher education, and industry that are designed to affect lasting improvements in a state's or region's research infrastructure, R&D capacity, and hence its national R&D competitiveness. The EPSCoR program is directed at those jurisdictions that have not been, not in the past participated in like competitive aerospace and aerospace related research activities. Currently there's like 25 states, and that's including Commonwealth of Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam. They all participate in EPSCoR, and so it's 5 federal agencies that conduct the EPSCoR program, including NASA. So today we'll just share just the schedule of the release of the fiscal year 2021 Notice of Funding Opportunities. So the EPSCoR International Space Station flight, their Notice of Funding Opportunity is planned to release September 20th, 2020, with proposals due in early January 2021. Awards are up to $1,000 for a 3-year period of performance. EPSCoR Rapid Response Research, and that Notice of Funding Opportunity is planned to release October 30th, 2020, with proposals due in early February 2021, and those are 1-year awards and up to $1,000. The EPSCoR Research Competitive Agreement Notice of Funding Opportunity is planned to release December 4th, 2020, with proposals due in early mid-March 2021. Awards are up to $750,000 for a 3-year period of performance. And this is a cooperative agreement, so there is substantial involvement with like NASA offices and NASA programs. Next slide. EPSCoR's Research Infrastructure Development Notice of Funding Opportunity is planned to release March 29th, 2021, with proposals due in late July 2021. These are 5-year awards with a max of $200,000 a year. And this notice of funding is every 5 years. And then the National Science Foundation and NASA EPSCoR joint Notice of Funding Opportunity, which is a fellowship internship program targeted for minority serving institutions. It's planned to release November 2nd, 2020, and it's titled Fellows Advancing in Science and Technology Pilot Program. There are 10 research teams and 4 NASA centers over a 2-year period of performance. So if you have any questions about that, you can actually reach out to Mr. Jeppy Compton, and his email is on the slide. That's jeppy.compton FFR.Compton and NASA.gov. Next slide. Our human, you go to the next slide. So yes, in our human exploration and operations, which I refer to as HEO, there is an IPA, Intergovernment Personnel Act opportunity. So this IPA is under the Human Health and Performance Health and Medical Technical Authority within the Human Health and Performance Directorate. The position is the Deputy Human System Risk Management, located at the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. And the IPA is for 2 years with a potential renewal, and start date is fall 2020. And the link for the IPA is on the screen. If we go to the next slide, I can give you a little bit more about it. Okay, so this position serves as a Deputy Human Systems Risk Manager in the Human Health and Performance Directorate as HHPD, supporting directive goals of optimizing human health throughout all phases of space life, providing support in development of systems, processes, and tools for achieving the goals within HHPD, and developing and recommending integrated goals across programs and projects and for the institutional functions within HHPD. And some of those major duties includes serving as a subject matter expert on risk assessment and risk communication, interfacing with the Office of the Chief Health and Medical Officer, standards manager to enable risk-involved updates to NASA Standards 3001 and other policy and standard documentation, and attending the Exploration Integration Panel to support coordinated responses from the Human Health and Performance Directorate to the Mars integrated groups and other exploration planning entities. So if this sparks your interest, please submit your resume and cover letter describing your interests and your qualifications to the link on the screen, which is jsc-hhp-news@mail.nasa.gov. Please use the subject line Deputy Human System Risk Manager position, and all of the applications must be submitted by close of business September 30th, 2020. Next slide. All right, this is the NASA Science Mission Directive Updates, and I'm going to hand over this part of the presentation to Mary Sladek.
All right, I think I've unmuted myself now. Can everybody hear me?
I can hear you, Mary. Yes, Mary, we can hear you.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So can I have the next slide, please? So I'm here representing my boss, the Deputy Associate Administrator for Research, Michael H. New. He sends everybody his regards and regrets that he can't join us today. He asked me to make sure that you all know where to find our Science Mission Directorate funding announcements. They are on the NSPIRE's website, which is here on this slide. And we also are looking for folks to review for these funding announcements, and that's at science.nasa.gov/researchers/volunteers-review-panels. Volunteer is a bit of a misnomer in that we do typically compensate folks who do review for us. So if you are interested, I hope you will pass this on to your faculty who may be. Next slide, please. We have the Science Mission Director. We are about 85% of the portfolio that Kenitra was talking about. And our Science Associate Administrator, Dr. Thomas Zurbuchen, recently hosted a COVID virtual town hall. This is one in a series. You can find it, the video on YouTube and the charts at the science.nasa.gov site. Look for Researchers Virtual Town Hall 2020. The Science Mission Director continues to make adjustments related to COVID-19. We are very well aware that the salary accommodations are going to be disappearing at the end of the month. And we have put forward a science policy document, number 36, augmentations and funded extensions request in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and related, and we put out an expression of interest that closed on August 21st. We are hoping to add an element to our research opportunities and space and earth sciences solicitation sometime in October. And the most recent change to ROSES was we have updated our topical workshop, symposium, and conferences program element to clarify that completely virtual events are eligible, as well as access innovations and technologies. So I am the point of contact for TWISC, as we call it. And if you have further questions, let me know. Next slide, please. Last time I was here, I talked a little bit about Science Mission Directorate's dual anonymous peer review pilot, which is taken in an attempt to make sure that the implicit bias or unconscious bias or even outright bias wasn't overly impacting the review of proposals. Just to recap, dual anonymous peer review is, you all know what anonymous peer review is. We don't know who the reviewers are. In dual anonymous, the proposals are written so that the reviewers are not told what institutions and teams are involved. We've had a series of webinars. This is a pilot that's being piloted through all the Science Mission Directorate divisions, except our newest one, and I'll tell you about our newest division on the next slide. But for this slide, we are having on October 7th a webinar to discuss the implementation for our Habitable Worlds program. And on this slide, you have the My Meetings link, as well as the audio and the access codes. So even if Habitable Worlds is not your area of interest, this webinar may be of interest to you, and you are welcome to join. Next slide, please. So I had hinted we have a new division in the Science Mission Directorate. This division was transferred from the Human Explorations and Operations Mission Directorate, and I'm really glad that Kenitra was able to squeeze some information out of them for this presentation. I think this may be the first time we're actually talking a little bit about HEO at FDP. So this new division, Biological and Physical Sciences, it used to be called Space, Life, and Physical Sciences Research and Applications, and it was a division in our Human Exploration Operations Mission Directorate. The only part of the grant portfolio that is staying in HEO from this former division is the Human Research Program. What has moved to us are the Space Biology Research Program that focuses on short and long duration spaceflight environment exposure on the biology of cells and microorganisms, plants, and animals. And we have also the Physical Science Research Program that conducts experiments in space, on Earth-based reduced gravity platforms, and in other ground-based facilities, and investigates and advances scientific knowledge in the disciplines of physical science, and to understand the effects of the space environment on physical and biological systems critical to space exploration. And you will be able to find more information about who is working in this biological and physical sciences division, again, on our science.nasa.gov site, and you can find the program officers there, including like the sub-elements. So for example, materials research is part of physical sciences research, and so you will find that as a sub-program. Next slide, please. So we have had a series of recent requests for information and community announcements, and we do put these, typically for RFIs, we usually put them out as a summary note on Beta SAM, but they're posted in full on our nspires.nasaprs.com website. And these include an RFI that's open now, partnering for production of spaceflight scientific instruments for Geospace Dynamics Constellation, and that is from the Heliophysics Division. And in addition, from the Heliophysics Division, we have a Space Weather Instruments and Missions for Science, or SWIMS RFI. Our Planetary Science Division is looking at the planetary data ecosystem, and their RFI is out. And there is a draft community announcement for the Earth Venture Mission 3 that is also posted along with the former, along with the draft. And it talks about significant changes based on the feedback that we've had from the community. And Earth Venture Mission, well, that's from the Earth Division. We have a community announcement about an intention to amend our research opportunities in space and earth sciences. And that is for payloads and research investigations on the surface of the moon, or PRISM. That actually was an RFI some time ago, and we're hoping that that new program element will be out in, let's say, 60 days. I can't tell you for sure. Next slide, please. So that's it for me until unless there's any questions. And I think I saw a question from Gene Feldman that said, hey, can I go to that dual anonymous peer review webinar? Anyone, it's welcome to anyone, even if you're not interested in the habitable world. Anitra, it's to you.
Yes, thank you. Those are all of our updates for NASA. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, Kenitra and Mary. Appreciate your time. At the moment, there's no other questions. So we'll move on to EPA, which is our next speaker. We have Alex Raver, who is the policy team leader and senior grants policy specialist at EPA. Take it away.
Thank you, Wade. Next slide, please. Oh, so thank you, everybody. I'm good to, man, I'm having trouble this afternoon. It's really great to be here with you all this afternoon, at least on the Eastern Coast, in the comfort of my home. Like most of you, I'm teleworking. Just have a few updates for you, which I'm glad to be able to share virtually, as I had to do a recording last time. So just general EPA COVID-19 information for you. I'm going to talk about some COVID grant information. We have some EPA recipient applicant information notices, otherwise known as RAINs. Some details on some upcoming research grant opportunities, and I want to put a plug in for our EPA grants listserv. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So EPA does have some general information on COVID-19 that's available at this website. The information includes disinfectants, drinking water, wastewater, EPA providing personal protective equipment, and general news from the EPA. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So right on our grants information page at epa.gov/grants, in the banner, you will see that we have our coronavirus frequently asked questions about grants and coronavirus or COVID-19. So it is front and center if you'd like to take a look at those. Next slide, please. Within our frequent questions about grants and coronavirus, we implemented this like a lot of other federal agencies in response to COVID-19 and the Office of Management and Budget's allowance for federal agencies to give various administrative, financial, and audit flexibilities to grant applicants and recipients. And as NIH has already noted, most of these flexibilities have expired except for 2 that are set to expire the end of the fiscal year. So quickly approaching, and we just wanted to highlight those for you, that you can continue to compensate employees who work on EPA financial assistance agreements that have been interrupted due to COVID-19, and also the single audit submissions were given an additional 3 months extension through December 2020, and you can reference the OMB memo there. Next slide, please. So we do again have the frequent questions on grants and coronavirus, and they include a variety of topics that are listed here. So our grants procedures, allowable costs, disruption of operations, procurements, extensions of project periods, grant competitions, and our suspension and debarment. If you have particular questions about any EPA grants that you are working on because of COVID, we suggest that you contact the project officer or the grant specialist, and their information is available on your award. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we do have our recipient and applicant information notices, more commonly known as RAINs, and they're available at our EPA Grants Policy Resource page. A link is provided there to you. Next slide, please. Oh, wow, the text got funny. The first one I want to make sure that everybody's aware of is EPA's implementation on the prohibition of certain telecommunication and video surveillance services or equipment, and the termination provisions from the Office of Management and Budget final guidance that was issued in the Federal Register on August 13th. This particular RAIN informs both our recipients and applicants of EPA's implementation of two of those final guidance requirements that did become effective upon publication in the Federal Register on August 13th. The first is the prohibition of certain telecommunication, video, and surveillance or equipment. This comes from the National Defense Authorization Statute, and then also termination provisions. Next slide, please. Continuing on that, we wanted to make sure that people knew that all of our EPA recipients were notified by email of these two new requirements. And I wanted to just specially note that the 2 CFR 200-216, which is the certain telecommunications requirement, it applies to both EPA recipients and subrecipients' obligations and expenditures on or after that date of the effective date, which is August 13th, 2020. And it is the sole responsibility of pass-through entities receiving EPA funds to communicate that requirement to their subrecipients, including borrowers under EPA-funded revolving loan fund programs. And just to make sure to emphasize that EPA does not have a direct relationship with those subrecipients. So we are relying on you as the pass-through entity, if that is such the case, to make sure that your subrecipients are notified of that requirement. Next slide, please. The other RAIN that I'd like to talk about is the establishment of standards for submission of administrative and financial assistance agreement forms or documents with electronic or digital signatures by email. With the onset of COVID, we recognized that people were still submitting things by email, which is totally acceptable, but we were recognizing that people were printing and signing with an ink signature and then converting it to PDF. And so in response to this, this really kind of forced EPA to try and come into the 21st century. This particular RAIN informs applicants and recipients of the process by which we will accept any administrative or financial agreement forms or documents with electronic or digital signature by email. And documents submitted through this process are considered to be part of EPA's official record. We have revised this RAIN to remove the previous information pertaining to the disclaimer that receipt email mentioned in the original RAIN, which is now just an optional element depending on whether it's necessary based on this particular circumstances. Next slide, please. The next RAIN I'd like to talk about is the EPA requirements for enrolling in the Automated Standard Application for Payments, or ASAP system, and dispersing EPA funds within a 5 business day of drawdown. We revised this RAIN back in July to inform applicants and recipients of the EPA policy regarding the use of the ASAP system and dispersing the funds promptly. And the reason for this revision is because of EPA's Las Vegas Finance Center closure. EPA now, all of our grants transactions, financial transactions, are executed and processed by the EPA's Research Triangle Park Finance Center. So I've listed the Finance Center's email address. This also has implications if you are submitting an SF 425. If your grant application has not been amended since the closure, your grant's terms and conditions could have the old Las Vegas Finance Center email address. And as of March, that office has been completely closed. So if you are trying to submit that and get an error, it is because, again, the Las Vegas Finance Center has been closed, and now the EPA's Research Triangle Finance Center is the place that processes all of those grants financial transactions. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we do have a couple of research grant opportunities that are coming up. The first thing that I wanted to share with you is that the Research Grants listserv is available to receive notifications of new funding opportunities. And if you go to this particular link, you can sign up to receive that email notification. Coming up soon, the Center for Early Life Stage Vulnerabilities to Environmental Stressors is a grant opportunity that closes on November 12th, 2020. Some information there on the funding opportunity number, the CFDA. It was opened in August, late August, and is open until November 12th. Next slide, please. Also on the research grant opportunity page, you can find that there's a notice of intent. This is a list of just the coming soon grant opportunities as they become available and are posted in grants.gov. This website will also be updated to provide additional details on the opening and closing dates of these research grant opportunities. Next slide, please.
It looks like
So,
Alex might have disconnected.
yeah, I don't hear her anymore. Okay, can you hear us, Alex?
Nope, it looks like she disconnected. Oh, she's back.
Oh, there she is. Alex, you're on mute. Alex? I can see her talking. Oh, are you off mute now? Oh, there you are.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Oh my goodness. I was listening the entire time when everybody else was doing it. And when does the meeting kick me out? When I'm talking. Okay, next slide, please. So lastly, I just wanted to highlight our EPA grants listserv. I've highlighted this every single time at the FDP. But I did want to make sure that folks knew about it. The only thing that I have to say is that for some reason, our software program isn't working with our updates. And so as of September 1st, we currently are experiencing technical difficulties. Our IT department globally has had an issue with this. So right now we're not able to send any notifications. But once that's fully operational again, we will resume sending these kind of notifications that I've highlighted in the previous slides. In the meantime, if you are interested in any of these kind of regular updates, I suggest that you please go to our EPA Grants Policy Resource page, where all of our recipient and applicant information notices are posted the day that they are issued. I know that's a little bit more manual labor. The listserv definitely helped us with that, but for some reason, again, we're experiencing these technical difficulties EPA-wide. Next slide, please. Is highlighted on our banner from our EPA.gov/grants website in the banner for the form for you to submit to. The form is really easy to fill out. Once again, once it's operational, you just have to submit your first, last name, and email address. And again, when it's operational, you'll be added to the listserv. Next slide, please. That's my contact information if you have any questions about EPA's recipient and application notifications, our policy, our EPA grants opportunities. I'm happy to answer any questions now, or if you've want to email me or give me a call, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thanks a lot, Alex. I'm glad you were able to rejoin so quickly after you got kicked off. I know I have a kid that plays video games sometimes, so I hope I don't get kicked off because of that. But there's one question. Is there any discussion about changing the way the 4700-4 form works in a grants.gov application? When we submitted previously directly to EPA, the form was only a cover page and the information required by the text boxes could comprise several pages.
Unfortunately, the form is not going to go away. We are currently in our information collection request renewal, and this form is part of our general grants ICR. We are working with the Office of Civil Rights and EPA to try and streamline this form. So we're hoping that by streamlining it, it will not be as burdensome for our applicants. Thank you for the question.
All right, that looks like all the questions. So thanks again, Alex. Appreciate your time. And
thanks,
next,
Wade. Thanks, FDP.
You're welcome. Next up, I think, is ONR, and I'll be giving the presentation for that. Okay. So on the next slide, we've got just very brief updates, not a lot to tell you about. We have a few initiatives. I'll give a more brief Section 889 implementation since Alex gave some and just maybe more of the unique things on the DoD side. And then we've got just one personnel change to notify you about. So next slide. So for initiatives, just to mention, one is related to a project going on in the DoD Grants and Agreements Working Group, or the Dodgers Working Group. This is, we drafted a delegation checklist, which this is probably a unique DoD issue because in DoD there's grants issued by roughly 100 different awarding offices, and there are ONR regional offices for which I'm in charge of, and then the DCMA, which is the Defense Contract Management Agency, that also gets the ones that we don't administer. So you've got separate organizations delegating post-award administration to other DoD components, and there's been a bunch of different ways those delegations have happened, and conflicting information about the delegation and some confusion on specifically what the awarding agency was going to keep in terms of functions and what was being delegated to either DCMA or ONR. So we've recently drafted a checklist that's supposed to provide a more uniform way of doing that, so everyone knows who's on first. So maybe something that will impact you guys in the sense that you'll need to know who to call. So the general thought is that this will be either attached to an award, or there might even be a link if there might be a sort of a standard delegation. And the thought would be you just have a link that would take you to somewhere that would show you what the checklist looks like, so you know who to call in a given scenario. Next bullet is just to inform folks that the Dodgers, we had proposed rules that went out. This was sort of the second phase of the implementing the uniform guidance. They went out back in November 7th on 2016. There were 6 proposed rules. We took a slightly different approach to many agencies, but they were just published in the Federal Register as final rules on August 19th, which is just in time to update them again for the 2 CFR updates that I guess will be effective, except for the Section 889 in a section on termination. Everything else will be effective. I think it's either November 12th or 13th. Can't remember exactly. So just to let everyone know that if you look up in the Federal Register, you'll be able to see those final rules to update the Dodgers. Third thing is more ONR specific. We've been a bit behind on our CAS disclosure statement reviews and audit resolution as well, and we've made a push to try to catch up on those. So if you're seeing a flurry of activity, this is why. CAS disclosure statements, if you're one of our schools, you should have gotten a letter already, an email that indicated that we were looking to get sort of a consolidated disclosure statement so we could do a more combined review. In some cases, we have many disclosure statement revisions, and we're trying to sort of get it done in a more streamlined way. So if you have concerns, get back or questions, get back to the person in the email if you've gotten one of those emails about the CAS disclosure reviews. In addition, we've got audit resolution that we're getting up to speed on, mainly single audit, but there's also a few others. So again, if you have any questions, get to your assigned administrator from the ONR regional office. And last bullet on this page, just to talk a little bit about the changes during the pandemic with the system reviews. So these are specifically contract requirements, and I know most of you are more embedded in the grants world, but I know a few of you do have contracts, and these system reviews would, particularly if you're a bigger university, would be applicable. Now, the contract purchasing system reviews recently had a change in the procurement rules where I guess the threshold for when you had to have a review used to be 25 million, and now it's 50, so that might limit some, but not all. And then the property management system reviews. So during the pandemic, we've basically stopped so far doing any on-site reviews, and we just downgraded everything that was an on-site review to what we call a desk review. So this fiscal year we'll only be doing desk reviews. Next year we plan on doing something in which we probably won't be visiting you, assuming the pandemic keeps going on for the fiscal year. We heard last week a presentation from HHS's CAS group, how they're doing the every 2 year, the equipment reviews, the inventory reviews for equipment every 2 years, and how they did one, I guess, a pilot case at a nonprofit. And so we're hoping to do something similar where we wouldn't have to come to you, but there could be an electronic way to check things through using Zoom or something while somebody's walking through a lab or something like that. So we're just starting to make plans on that for next fiscal year. And the CPSR, the purchasing system reviews, again, a contract requirement. We're expecting next year we're going to be able to catch up on that. We don't expect much change on that. We think we can do that generally fully virtually. We just need a place for you to give us the documents. So either that would be through something like the DoD Safe site, which is a Dropbox you can drop documents securely, or we would consider, if you have your own site that we can get into to look at your reviews that's secure, we could also do that as well. So just things that come up for next year, since the pandemic is going to be affecting us a little while longer. So next slide. So Alex covered some of this. So this is just the general, what Section 889 was, just this prohibition on either the feds or the contractors or grant recipients from procuring or using the covered telecommunications equipments from currently the Chinese companies listed or subsidiaries. Next slide. And so as Alex mentioned, it was effective on 13 August through, at least on the grant side, through the final notice for the 2 CFR updates. And then there was a separate implementation on the contract side. So just to give a few quick differences between the two, if you happen to submit contract proposals or other transaction agreement proposals, you'd be required to submit a representation before getting a new contract or a new agreement through those OTAs. And by OTAs, I'm talking about the ones on the procurement side. So that you would also need to submit a representation if it was an option exercise or a no funds extension, which is slightly different than the grant side. And I guess there is a path for waivers, but we do expect that to be very difficult to obtain. Now on the grant side, for 2 CFR, it's generally just for new awards issued after 13 August. We're generally not doing it for, updating terms and conditions for existing awards that were effective before that date. However, for O&R, at least, we are going to apply the new provision to what we call expansions, which would be modifications to existing awards that have a new budget and increase the ceiling and have a new project plan. So we would just be doing it for those. There's no certification on the grant side as far as I'm aware for new awards. It would just be in the terms and conditions. However, there is some type of certification that will probably be required for new indirect cost agreements, or at least expect potentially some kind of statement on that. Next slide. Okay, so this is my last slide. This is just one personnel change. This, I guess, might have taken place before the last FDP meeting, but we have a new Chief of Naval Research, who is Rear Admiral Lawrence Selby, who's replaced David Hahn, who's retired. So I think that's it for me. So it looks like there are no questions. So we can move on. The next up, Susan Sloan, who is the director of the GWIR program. Oh wait, I'm sorry, there is one question. Thanks, Michelle. If we have completed our SAM.gov renewal recently, there is a question about section 889. Is having a current SAM.gov FARs and DFARS report sufficient to meet the requirement? Can we go back a couple slides? Just want to look real quick. I think the answer to the question is yes, because I think the slide says if it is the FAR 52204-24, and if that's what's in SAM, then that should be sufficient. I'm not 100% sure, so I can follow up on that. And that looks like that's it. So we'll move on to GWIR updates, which is our Government, University, Industry Research Roundtable. Susan Sloan's the director for GWIR from the National Academies of Science. So take it away, Susan.
All right, thanks very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So first, I just wanted to acknowledge and thank Michelle Mazzucci, who had mentioned during the business meeting the relationship that GWIR has with the FDP. So GWIR serves as the neutral convener of the FDP at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. So it is its own roundtable. It is charged with improving the research enterprise of the United States by examining pressing cross-sectoral issues that prevent the U.S. research enterprise from reaching its full potential. This mission is achieved by convening senior-most representatives from government, university, and industry to frame and address the critical issues and challenges that face our nation. I might note that the participation of the federal science and technology leadership in an open dialogue and informal exchange of ideas precludes making formal recommendations or offering specific advice to federal agencies, and this preclusion carries forward with FDP as well. So instead, with the roundtable, we seek to stimulate new approaches by direct engagement of government, universities, and industry leaders in their respective spheres. So first slide, please. So we also work with a co-chair system. We have a university co-chair and a industry co-chair. They serve also 3-year terms, staggered 3-year terms with an optional follow-on 3-year term. So Dr. Al Grasso with MITRE Corporation is our current industry co-chair. He's in his first term. And Dr. Lori Leshin, the president of Worcester Polytechnic Institute, has started her second 3-year term. And we are certainly grateful for their leadership. Next slide, please. So we hold 3 meetings a year. They are on topical meetings, the topics suggested by the membership writ large. The original title and focus for our June 2020 meeting was Research and the New Space Enterprise. However, that plan was tabled with the evolving situation around COVID-19. So instead, let's move to the next slide, please. We moved to a series of virtual meetings. We did 6 virtual workshops between May and August of 2020, looking at various aspects of resilience of the research enterprise during the COVID-19 crisis. So we looked at 6 areas of interest: new models for open research data and collaboration, science communication during crisis, transitioning to hybrid, virtual, and in-person research, learning, and work environments, COVID-19 and cybersecurity, pandemic and post-pandemic supply chain security, and the economic impacts of the pandemic and projections for recovery. And perhaps to nobody's surprise, that last workshop on economic impacts was the best attended. They were all well attended, and we had 306 unique attendees over the course of the series. So next slide, please. We are now in the planning processes for our next meeting, which will once again be in a virtual format. So for the fall meeting, we're organizing a series of short virtual workshops to consider what can be learned from collaboration, innovation, and adaptation to the COVID crisis across research institutions, and how these lessons might be applied to strengthen the research enterprise against future crises. So we're looking at 4 specific sessions. Next slide, please. We're looking at addressing inequities of the crisis. And here we've got a couple of questions that we hope to address specifically. One is, what cross-sectoral approaches might address the health equity issues that have been magnified as a result of the pandemic? And the other question is, what lessons can the public health community apply to build trust and address ongoing health equity issues in communities of color? The second workshop will be on informing future emergency preparedness efforts. And our questions there are, were successful emergency networks pre-existing, or did they form to specifically address the crisis? And what can be learned from the crisis about building agile emergency response networks at the national, state, and local levels? The third workshop in this series will look at crisis-driven collaboration across government, universities, and industry, so that trifecta. With this session, we acknowledge that the scale and the interdisciplinary nature of the crisis necessitated the formation of conventional and unconventional partnerships. Questions here: how were partnerships between state governments, universities, and industry likely to be form or be utilized during the crisis? And how might these partnerships be sustained or grown in the long term? And how might the crisis inform the pursuit of rapid collaboration opportunities in the future? And then that fourth session, we plan to look at adaptations to federal funding and research regulations. And here we're asking, what are the broader impacts of rapid response research funding mechanisms and more adaptive regulatory frameworks on the pace, productivity, and accessibility of science? And what are the future of these partnerships? So we'll also spend a day on breakout sessions. We'll have 2 sets of breakout sessions. The first networking breakout session, attendees will be able to select from 3 options. One group will talk about celebrating victories and learning from failure, managing during the pandemic. Another is invited to look at frugal science during COVID. And then a third group will talk about future of international research collaborations at universities. And then the second networking session, again, 3 sessions. One option is viral testing. Second is convergent research. And the third is economic impacts of COVID on research institutions. And I might note that members of GWIR's Leadership Council will be meeting the day prior to this full membership meeting to discuss great power competition, largely between the US and China, but also other countries as well. And our guest presenter will be the former Secretary of Defense, Ash Carter, who's agreed to kick off that discussion. And we are very pleased to acknowledge that Dr. Ponch is the latest to agree to serve on the GWIR Council. So we're delighted to have his participation as well. Next slide, please. So we also host webinars on a monthly basis, and these have been extremely popular. Here on the screen, you can see what webinars we've held since the last FDP meeting. Each one of these webinars, the audio file and the slides is archived on the GWIR website, so you can access those conversations at your leisure. These sessions are free, they're no cost, but they do require registration. So as you can see, it's a whole variety of issues: COVID-19 High Performance Computing Consortium in May, workforce education implications of COVID-19 in June. Again, COVID is dominating the discussion for us. Then in July, we moved over to NSF's Future of Work at the Human Technology Frontier, core research, in August 27th. Human-centered AI, implications for policy and research. This is in part what Dr. Ponch was talking so excitedly about earlier. And then September 15th, driving talent, workforce development, and opportunities, APL's Innovation and Economic Prosperity designation. Next slide, please. Then the next webinar, October 27th, NSF's Convergence Accelerator. As I mentioned, these sessions are free. They're open to all. If you would like to be kept apprised of these sessions, please feel free to subscribe to the GWIR mailing list at www.nas.edu/GWIR. Next slide, please. And then just looking forward, I mentioned that GWIR hosts 3 meetings a year. They're typically in February, June, and October. They are typically face-to-face meetings. Of course, we've adjusted, as has everybody else, to a virtual format, which has been working rather well. Our meeting dates for next year are February 9th and 10th, 2021, June 14th and 15th, and October 12th and 13th. After each of the meetings, we prepare a written proceedings of a workshop in brief, or a written summary of the topical meeting and discussion. So I would encourage you to take a look at those as well if you're interested. They are all, once again, archived on the GWIR website, so you can readily access those. And then something that we're offering newly as of this current year was an annual annual member subscription to Issues in Science and Technology magazine, which we have found really compelling. It's a magazine that's co-produced by the National Academies and Arizona State University. And so we are offering a subscription to our members and encouraging our members also to write for the magazine. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's it. Are there any questions?
Okay, thanks, Susan. I don't see any yet, but I'll give just a brief moment because I'm going to go back and answer one of my questions, which I just got a confirmation on to see if anyone has any. But the person asked about whether the annual certifications on the SAM.gov website was good enough for the section 889, and apparently yes, that will be. However, apparently they're not going to show up until October, but as long as we can see it in there, there won't be anything separate required. So just to close the loop on that. And it looks like there's no further questions. So